Good morning. We're delighted to be with you today to talk about some of the DOJ priorities and policies. Our guest speaker today is Acting Assistant Attorney General Omeed Assefi.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm delighted to speak at the conference and greetings from Washington, D.C.
Great. Well, so this is your first address to an international audience. Can you start by sharing with the audience a little bit about our enforcement and policy priorities?
I'm happy to address that question, but first I'd like to thank everyone at Bundeskartellamt, to President Andreas Munt and his team for having me here. I'm delighted to speak here today and go over my enforcement priorities. This is my first address to an international audience, and I'm delighted that it's with the BKA and President Munt. You all have been thought leaders in the antitrust space on competition issues for decades, and I'm delighted to be here. It's my privilege to be able to contribute to the conversation that you all host. So thank you for having me. In a nutshell, the agenda I seek to lead is about prioritizing American consumers. Antitrust enforcement and policy play an indispensable role, Dina, for people trying to achieve the American dream, for people trying to have upward mobility in their life. And so what we seek to do is provide them some form of economic security. And I think that manifests itself on the specific agenda items we look to focus on. And as you know, that's kitchen table issues, healthcare, food costs, housing, transportation, insurance, entertainment, and any other markets that have a direct impact on the lives of everyday Americans. Another priority I'd like to highlight on the criminal space is incarceration and how that drives deterrence from anti-competitive conduct. You know, for many years in America, we've prioritized settlements and fines, but those don't always achieve the goal of deterrence the same way incarceration would. And so what the criminal program has tried to do is reorient the public to know that anti-competitive agreements, whether in the labor market, whether in financial markets, can lead to really, really treacherous consequences. And in this form, it's going to prison. And so, for all those reasons, we've been sort of focused on making sure that the public is aware of that they're aware that this is a priority change in some ways, but that our number one driving focus is to make everyday life better for the American consumer.
Great. Yeah. And I think a lot of this work has been led under your leadership as the criminal deputy in the past.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have a variety of very exciting cases that you've been very helpful on, Dina, and our team has been great on. We've had, a long investigation in the live entertainment space with Live Nation that our team is currently in trial in the Southern District of New York, challenging their market power and monopoly status in the primary ticketing market, and in live venues. And of course, that in that space, we're trying to increase competition with the understanding that competition is the best source of bringing down prices and giving more options to consumers. We have a recent filing in a healthcare case with Ohio Health, and that was a case in which we sued, challenging a corporation's anti-competitive contract restrictions that force patients to pay more money for basic healthcare. And so we filed that a few weeks ago. And again, in criminal enforcement, we've really been prioritizing people who commit procurement fraud. And so people who submit false invoices to the federal government, who basically rip off the American people and the American taxpayer to line their own pockets. So those are just some of the examples of the agenda that we've been, implementing with your and I's leadership and everybody else at the Department of Justice.
Yeah. Well, we've been busy here. So since you mentioned criminal enforcement, there's been a lot of buzz about the Antitrust Division's new Antitrust Rewards Program. I think there's a lot of interest in it, also internationally. So I hope maybe you can tell the audience a little bit more about it.
Absolutely. I first had to give Dina all of the credit because, for all of our friends now in Germany, when we were thinking of what to name this program, it's actually Dina who said we should call it Cash for Cartels, which I think is a very catchy title. And we sort of always laugh about it because some people think Cash for Cartels goes to promoting cartels. But obviously, this program is, as Dina's showing, is to attack cartels. But basically what happened is, whistleblowers, people who come forward, they take a big risk in life. And as you all know, they risk their job, they risk their livelihood, they have the risk of retaliation, and there's really nothing that they get in return for taking that risk. And in the United States and at the Department of Justice, that changed in July of 2025. In July of 2025, the Department of Justice and the US Postal Service entered into a memorandum of understanding, where essentially any fine that the Department of Justice gets from a settlement, it can now devote 15 to 30% of that fine to compensate a whistleblower. So it's a very unique idea that relies on our existing statutory authority. And when we had it announced in July, I think people were perhaps understandably skeptical as to how this program would work. I'm very pleased to report that they're no longer skeptical, because in January of this year, so only 6 months into the existence of the program, we announced a $1 million payment to a whistleblower who blew the whistle on a bid rigging conspiracy in the secondhand used car market. This is somebody who took a great risk, who went forward and informed his company about a bid rigging conspiracy and his concerns about it, and he was basically told to go away and to stop raising the issue. And instead of letting it lie, this person, who in many ways is a hero, decided to come forward and work with the Department of Justice. And at the time he came forward and spoke to us, Dina, there was no promise, benefit, any sort of idea that he would get any financial compensation for his efforts. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, because of this program, we were able to tell him to his face that he got $1 million. And it's been announced now, and it's resulted in a flood of people coming forward with their own whistleblower claims across a variety of different markets in many cases. And so right now, this program is monumental because, as a lot of our friends in Germany may well know, one of the prides of the Antitrust Division is our leniency program. And our leniency program, as you all know, and there's different versions of it in Europe with our European friends and regulators, if you're the first company that comes forward and informs the Antitrust Division about a crime, you will receive some form of leniency in terms of a deferred prosecution agreement, a non-prosecution agreement, but you get the benefit of coming forward. And that program we're very proud of, but it requires people to make the decision to come forward, in this case, companies. What the whistleblower program does has completely changed the calculus as to how companies can operate. In the past, companies and their CEOs may think to themselves and say, let's see if DOJ even finds out about this. Let's not come forward. Now they don't have that luxury, because now every CEO and their C-suite staff need to be thinking, if we don't come forward, there's now a very real possibility that one of their employees may come forward as a whistleblower.
Thousands of employees, right?
Yes, thousands of employees, as Dina says. It's not just one, it's one of thousands could come forward. Mm-hmm. And they would get compensated for coming forward. They would have an incentive to come forward. And then if they do come forward and qualify as a whistleblower, their company is now barred from getting any sort of leniency. So it's turned the whole industry sort of on its head, and it's been very exciting, and it's resulted in massive case generation. And we're very proud of the program, and we're very proud for this innovation that, again, Dina is credited with calling cash for cartels.
Thank you. And since you mentioned incentives, and I know we have a German audience with us today, a recurrent question we ask is whether you have to be a U.S. citizen to obtain the rewards. So tell us about that.
No, I mean, at this point, anybody can come forward. We would love to hear from you all in Germany. As our friends know, the scope of our antitrust cases, I talk about the American consumer, that's true, but the scope of our cases are truly global. And we have really fantastic partners, and we're very excited to be able to work with them. And if you come forward, you will receive the same sort of benefits that we're describing in the leniency program and in the whistleblower program. So this is truly global in its reach. And we hope you're all encouraged to come forward, because as you all know, these cases are only as good as the evidence and the witnesses. And so we need people who say, I'm ready to come forward. This conduct is not okay. And if that happens, we're here to take care of you and protect you.
Great. And we'll be sharing a poster of our antitrust reward programs with our Bundeskartellamt organizers. You should have some copies with you in the conference room with a QR code. We'd love to hear from you. With that, let's move to some policy questions. So the DOJ and FTC recently announced the launch of a joint public inquiry for consideration of guidance on collaboration among competitors. Tell us a little bit about this initiative.
That's a great question. So this is a public inquiry that we've launched on guidelines for collaborations amongst competitors, as Dina said. In December of 2024, the prior administration rescinded those guidelines. And what Chairman Ferguson and I and our teams have done, including Dina, is put out a request to get more information. Because from our standpoint, if you want to be aggressive on enforcement, you should also provide people with the rules of the road to let private industry know what is okay and what's not okay and where are the lines. And so to me, as somebody who cares deeply about aggressive enforcement, it's inconsistent with that goal to then withdraw the guidelines on what are pro-competitive and indeed lawful collaborations. So the position we take is we're going to be very aggressive on enforcement. We're going to be looking to litigate and bring cases. But on the other hand, what goes with that is letting companies know what are lawful collaborations, what are pro-competitive collaborations. And we here at the Justice Department, we support private industry. We support pro-competitive agreements, and we want those to be furthered. The ones we care about are the illegal ones. And so we need to define, it's our responsibility to define what is a anti-competitive collaboration, what's an illegal collaboration. And so that's the effort we have underway at the moment. And we'll have more to come, but it's an exciting time to sort of show private industry that we're not here to ruin companies. We're here to get lasting relief for the American consumer, to open up markets to competition. And then we want to stay out and let the sort of market work its magic.
Well, that's a great segue, talking about how the market should work its magic, to our next question. So the conference here today takes place at an extraordinary time, and particularly with changes related to digital markets. The US and Europe seem to take different approaches addressing competitive concerns in digital markets. Can you talk a little bit about this topic?
Absolutely. I mean, and Dina, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this too, because as everyone should know, I may be here talking about it. This is Dina's expertise as our international and policy and appellate deputy. But I think the part I would chime in on is our differences are respectful. I think where we look at regulation in America is we are very sensitive to being overbearing regulators. What we want to do is give people, like I said before, the rules of the road. And then we are of the opinion and belief that the best way to have prosperity, economic mobility, and better cost of living is not through sort of having price controls or overbearing regulation. We think the free market needs to flourish. And when there's healthy competition, what I mean by that is also vicious competition between these companies. And when that competition is allowed to happen and there's rules of engagement, that competition is going to result in prices coming down. It's going to result in greater benefits because people are competing. What we don't want is to have regulations that prop up big companies and don't assist the sort of smaller players who are, tugging on the legs of people to get into the marketplace. So that's what I would think would be our sort of biggest difference, but I want Dina to also have time to sort of go into that as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think the US is, to begin with, less regulatory than Europe, but especially now under the leadership of President Trump, there is a huge emphasis on deregulation. We had an executive order in early 2025 on unleashing prosperity through deregulation. And as part of that work that we've done under the executive order, we've undertaken the job of looking for regulation all over our marketplace and recommending how it can be narrowed or eliminated. And we believe that's very helpful work, which has a direct effect on the welfare of consumers. The other thing I would point out is that in the U.S., antitrust enforcement takes place ex post, right? After something, some violation of the law takes place. And in that sense, it's a very different approach than what we are now seeing in Europe, which seems to consider ex ante regulation. Um, it's we don't view that as helpful. We think the market should be allowed to run its course unless and until we detect a violation.
Absolutely. And I think it's been truly wonderful to have this collaboration with you all on the global stage, because I think it's an ability for us to learn sort of what motivates each other and what's the best way to sort of get relief in a global sense. And so that's been particularly great experience for me and for others to work with you all in that capacity.
So that question was about digital markets in general. And then the question is if you whether you believe this also holds true in when it comes to AI, because we hear a lot of concerns that the growth of AI could amplify the existing digital market concentration and issues. So what do you think about AI?
Yeah, I mean AI, it's a fascinating space, and it's very quickly becoming a part of all of our lives in a way that we can't avoid. I think generally speaking, as a litigator is and somebody who's focused on deterrence, is I really don't think there's a difference between human beings coming together and colluding and conspiring on prices or on bids or on market allocation and on anti-competitive agreements. And I similarly don't think there's any meaningful difference whether it's human beings who do it or whether AI does it. And so I think what we need to be looking at is to always make sure that it's not some sort of hidden hand that's deciding what happens and what the prices are, but it's actually the market that does it. And so that's always what we're looking at. AI is always very interesting because we appear to be sort of learning as we go along as to sort of the different complexities of how it's implemented. But that's our ultimate focus, is making sure that even if AI is used, it's not being used in an anti-competitive way where it's sort of the middleman of a wider conspiracy.
Hmm. Yeah. And speaking of sharing of anti-competitive information, maybe do you want to say a few words about our real page
Yeah, absolutely. We're
investigation? Yeah.
very proud of our real page settlement that we had earlier last year. Our former colleague and friend Mark Hamer and Gail Slater were driving forces behind that settlement.
Mhm.
And it's a fight against algorithmic collusion, and it touches really on my point about AI, which is when you have a database that is taking in competitor information, private information, that competitors would normally never share with each other. And then it's using that information to spit out a baseline of price information that's very concerning. And I think what always gets my mind focused on this issue, Dina, is the one of the most enjoyable parts of the job, and I'm sure you see this too in Germany, is meeting the CEOs of this company. They're so impressive. Some of them have started their company from the ground up, and to really meet them is impressive. But what they need or should have to go through is competition. And that competition will result in benefits for everybody. And so, what you see in an algorithmic collusion sense, but in others as well, is you see competitors take off their gloves and decide to work with each other. And these are heated rivals, and they're, whether in algorithmic collusion or in other types of collusion, they're passing along to each other information that they normally would never give each other. And so to me, that's the red flag. And I've seen different emails and correspondences when I was a litigator on the line, where you hear company A telling company B, who's its biggest rival, company A will tell company B, I think this will be a great deal for company B. And you sit there and go, why on earth does company A want a good deal for company B? It should be the opposite. And so when you see competitors working with each other in that way, your concern is the American people or the German people are the ones who are going to bear the costs of the lack of competition.
Yeah. Consumers benefit from fierce competition.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to merger enforcement. There have been press reports that indicate you intend to be aggressive in taking on anti-competitive mergers. Are those reports true?
They're absolutely true. And I will say, right, I think part of the discussion on mergers has been sort of lost on people from this sense. We just hung up a sign in our conference room, right outside our conference room, and Dina helped with this, because anytime we want to block a merger, we're accused of being, radical leftists who don't believe in the free market. And we put up a sign outside of our conference room that tells the outside parties before they come in that before you walk into the conference room, you concede and recognize that in the prior year, we approved something like 99.5% of all mergers submitted for merger review. And the reason I say that is because we really are talking about enforcement of a very small subset of mergers. Now, those are usually the biggest mergers, and they're the ones in the most impactful markets. But I say that all because I really do believe that enforcement is important. And what I mean by enforcement is if the parties can get together and have a genuine discussion about what it would take to let the merger go through, we're always open for discussion. We're open to consent decrees. We're open to settlements, especially settlements that focus on structural relief. But we want to make sure that that threat of litigation is there. And without that threat of litigation, nobody would ever be willing to sort of meet us where our concerns are. And we have such a talented team of trial attorneys who are invested in these issues and dedicated to making sure that there are real returns for the American people. So we care a lot about merger enforcement, and we're open to discussion. But we are prepared to litigate. And usually in those last rights meetings we have, as Dina has sat in on, we have a settlement, a proposed settlement on the table. We have an open discussion. But if they're not willing, the party's not willing to meet us where we are at on the settlement, then it's time to file a complaint and litigate. And that's the best part of the job.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, since we're appearing this morning in Berlin, let's talk a little bit about international antitrust, the priorities and thoughts. And why don't you start? Yeah.
Well, we're very excited for the World Cup initiative. I can tell you that as a young boy, I was always obsessed with the World Cup, and I always, had a sort of global interest in it. My parents are from Iran, and that's always kind of been a big part of my life. But I know we have different ICN conferences and OECD conferences coming up. I know that I'm supposed to be answering the questions, but I'd love to turn it over to you, Dina, because international is your realm. And so what do you think are the biggest priorities kind of coming up?
Sure. So I would start by paraphrasing Mark Twain and to say that our departure from international antitrust has been greatly exaggerated. We are very much still in. Um, yeah. I think we continue to be leaders of the ICN. We are co-chairs of the Competition Agency Procedures Group together with our co-host from the Bundeskartellamt. So that's important work. That's very important for us because we believe good due process leads to better enforcement and better cases. And together with the Bundeskartellamt, we hope to set an example to agencies around the world, especially younger ones, how to respect and follow good due process procedures. Of course, we continue to be dedicated to our work at the OECD, and hopefully we will be participating in the meetings upcoming in June. Merger cooperation continues day in and day out. When we have waivers from the parties to discuss mergers that have global effects. Finally, on the international front, I wanted to touch a little bit about a concerning development that we've been seeing recently, and that is the misuse of competition, air quotes on purpose, competition cloak over actions that are really trade actions. It's concerning when agencies try to use antitrust analysis as a way to hide basically trying to achieve trade goals. It's something that we definitely avoid. We've unfortunately seen some of it when it comes to do with joint licensing, a kind of a buyer's cartel dynamic. We've been calling it out and we'll continue to call it out. And we hope that our fellow antitrust agencies around the world will continue to focus on substantive antitrust analysis because that yields the best results for consumers. Just like regulation hurts consumers and markets and impedes markets, trade interventions in markets also are not beneficial for the consumers.
Perfectly put.
So I think with that, we're done for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad to have joined you for your first international speech.
Thank you for having me, and to everyone at Bundeskartellamt, thank you so much. It's so nice to meet you, and I hope to meet you in person someday.
Vielen Dank. Auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you.